Gonzaga Nation with another episode. I'm your host, Dan Dickow, taking a preseason look with a number of analysts for their thoughts, not just on Gonzaga, but the world of college basketball in general. Today's guest, he's been a guest in the past. Thankfully, he wanted to come on, and I'm glad he wanted to come on because he's one of the best and most knowledgeable. At least I got to say this about the Big East. He's going to throw some shade at the West Coast Conference, I'm sure. Hopefully he's learned his lesson. He says Gonzaga properly. I'll test him on that at some point today. But he's my colleague at CBS Sports. He's one of the best out there, none other than power point guard from Villanova, Chris Walker. C-Walk, how we doing?
Listen, there you go. I'm with you again. You're right. I can say Gonzaga the right way. So you know what? Because of you, Dan, I correct other people now.
That's awesome. I love to hear that now. The student has become the teacher in regards to pronunciation of Gonzaga. So let's talk big picture now. College offseason of transfer portal talk, NIL talk. Besides those two things, what are you most excited about now that practice has started? There can actually be some excitement of games being right around the corner.
You know what? What team is going to be the team that surfaces this year? Like, I'm really thinking about, Duke's going to be great this year, probably. Filipowski came back, which I didn't think he'd come back. Proctor came back. I thought all those guys would be one-and-done guys. Kentucky overhauling their roster. I mean, like, when is the new Kentucky going to be, actually the old Kentucky, going to be the team that was a team full of one-and-dones, the top recruiting class in the country? Seems like Calipari has learned his lesson with the portal and turning back the clock and going back to what he did before. The question is, what team is going to, I don't know if Arizona out west, UCLA loses a lot of guys to the pros, and Villanova's trying to revamp their program. I guess the story, Dan, would be, what is St. John's going to be?
Yes.
With Pitino. What is, and I know I'm talking Big East, but what is Georgetown going to be? A traditional power that hasn't been great in the last 4 or 5 years with Ed Cooley there. Can Kansas State do with that? Were they just, a Cinderella team, or is Jerome Tang really building something at K-State? And for Texas, was it because they had a bunch of older players that Chris Beard brought in, and Rodney Terry got the opportunity to coach them, or can he continue to do what Chris Beard was building? And again, I can go around the country. Will Tom Izzo be the man of March again?
Yeah.
There's a ton of storylines out there. Ohio State, when is Coach going to get that program to the point where it was when Thad Matta there, when they were going with Final Fours? You know what I mean? Like, again, every single league, and obviously the elephant in the room is, and I know, you probably, I shouldn't say you hate to hear this because you left the Pac-12, the Pac-10. There is no more Pac-12.
Yeah.
Think about this, Dan. UCLA versus Rutgers, UCLA versus Maryland, UCLA versus Penn State.
That doesn't have, for a West Coast guy like myself, that has no buzz around it.
Zero.
To be honest, it just doesn't. I understand there's money behind this realignment. Football drives the majority of it, but, that doesn't make sense to me because that's not going to be a well-watched game, whatever network it is on.
It's not sustainable. I get the football argument, but and you know what's funny? One of my bosses back in the day, he saw this coming. He saw this was in the works probably in 2015. It was coming. As a matter of fact, I remember working for Jay Wright at Villanova, and we were like 2008, 2000. He saw this. This was coming when the Big East broke up. And a lot of the Pittsburgh and Syracuse and Louisville and everybody went to the ACC. West Virginia went to the Big 12. Like, this was coming, and it was only a matter of time for there to be 4 power leagues. And look where we are now. We're going to be in a situation where it's going to be 4 power leagues. The question is, and it's interesting that Washington State and Oregon State are both ranked in football, but yet they're the one without the league. And Cal and Stanford, they're just not very good at football. Stanford was good for a while, and Cal has, been pedestrian at best. Now they're the team that gets to go to the ACC, and Washington State and Oregon State are probably relegated to going to the Mountain West, even though they're trying to fight it.
Yeah, that Cal Stanford one to the ACC makes even less sense than USC UCLA, in my opinion, to the Big Ten. But I want to stay on the Big East because Yukon knocked off Gonzaga last year in the tournament. They go on to win the national title. They're going to have a rematch with Gonzaga in Spokane this year. You're around the Big East all the time. You touched on the excitement around Pitino at St. John's and what Ed Cooley might do at Georgetown to return them to prominence. But give us a quick take on Yukon and how good they're going to be, because Gonzaga fans are going to be interested to hear about that team and who they're going to face in December.
The interesting thing is, I think, if you talk to Coach Danny Hurley right now, he'd be asking the same question: how good are we going to be? I mean, they
with
lost,
a few expletives, though, right?
Yeah, of course. But if they lost, a lot. They lost Hawkins, a lottery pick. Lost Sonogo, Big East Player of the Year. And they lost who I thought arguably was their glue guy, their best player. And Dan, you and I can appreciate basketball players.
Yeah.
They may not have they may not have one thing that they're great at, but they can do everything. And that was Andre Jackson. I thought he was
good.
really the Swiss Army knife of that program. And I'm gonna be honest with you, they lost a guy like Cal Katera, who came off the bench and made threes. Now they got a talented group of freshmen coming in. They got Alex Caravan, who's there, who's a starter last year. I thought made a tremendous rise in their program from a freshman never playing to what he became, a guy who guarded everyone and could knock down shots like you wouldn't believe. The big fella, he's coming back as well. And so, I forget his name. His name.
He's a 7'2". Last year was a freshman, just burst on the scene. Yeah,
Klingon.
Yes,
His name is Klingon.
Yes.
And he's tremendous. Now, again, he was a backup last year. So now you're the primary. It's very different. People think, oh, plug and play. It doesn't work that way. We'll see what happens, particularly like for Gonzaga, which I believe, right, that, and I said this to someone on a show the other day, I said, the program I want to see the most is the Gonzaga Bulldogs, because in my mind, they lost the Christian Laettner of our era in Drew Timme. I'm sorry. They can say whatever they want. They got this guy, bro, you lost Drew Timme. Drew Timme was an absolute beast, and he will be missed. No matter who else is on that roster, the one guy everyone feared was Drew Timme. And he's a big, and in college basketball, Dan, you know this, bigs are more important in college basketball than they are in the pros. You look at the last 4 college players of the year. Like, they're just more important. They can dominate more in this league than they can in the pros. So UConn also got their starting point guard back, who put his name in the draft, who was a transfer. So, they got some guys that are pretty good. And they had a big-time recruiting class that came in. So UConn is going to be really good again. Now, people got to understand, UConn finished 5th in the Big East and won a national championship. More importantly, 2 years removed, UConn was in the AAC, struggling against Houston, struggling against Memphis. And in 2 years, Danny Hurley has won the championship. That's amazing, but it's also a testament to what that program used to be in the past when I was a player, when I saw them build it with Cliff Robinson my first year as a player. To
Uncle Cliffy from the Blazers?
Cliff Robinson, I played against Cliff Robinson. That was the first year that they took it. It was on the ascent that first year that it became a big-time program. Coached against them when they had I don't want to say Ray Allen, but oh my God, what's his name? He's a coach with the Heat now. I forget his name. Oh, it's killing me right now. I can see
Danielle
his face.
Marshall?
Not Danielle, but he was from Milwaukee. Oh my God. It'll drive me crazy that I don't remember it. I'll remember for the end of the show.
You'll text me in about 30 minutes.
Exactly. I mean, the bottom line is they've had so many.
Yeah.
Rudy Gay. I mean, you name it. They've had a ton of guys in that program. And it looks like with Hawkins, with Jackson, obviously he wasn't a high draft pick, they have it back again. But let me tell you something. Kentucky brought in a great freshman class, but so did UConn. And I had a chance to speak the Freshman Fundamentals Big East event in New York, and they're long. Those freshmen, I'm like, oh my God, these dudes are going to be good again. And Danny Hurley with Kamani Young, who's the associate head coach, excellent recruiters. And you know what's funny, Dan? Similar to Spokane. And again, I don't want is it called Spokaneans? I don't want the Spokaneans to get mad at me. Spokanites to get mad at me, because I used to work at LMU, and I used to work at Pepperdine. So I knew Spokane when Fitzy was the coach. Way
Okay.
back in the day when y'all had a kid named, oh my God, what's Jeff's last name? The
Jeff
big guy.
Goss?
No,
Oh,
not
Jeff Brown.
Jeff Brown. That's how far I go back in Gonzaga basketball. Right? Again, it had not taken off with Santangelo and all those guys yet. And
Yeah.
Richie Fromm. I was there at the beginning of that at that time when Gonzaga was still good. But going to Spokane was the worst place anybody wanted to go. Well, have you ever been to Storrs, Connecticut? I'm like, oh my God, who? But they found a way, the same way the Zags, the point I'm making, have found a way to make it attractive to high-level players. And that's similarly what Gonzaga has done, what Yukon accomplished, and Danny Hurley is now bringing that back.
Well, let's stay on the topic. You mentioned, having been at Pepperdine, having been at LMU. You're one of the analysts that I love getting your take from, because you were immersed in the coaching world for quite some time. You were a head coach for a while. You've been an assistant in a number of different places, including your alma mater, Villanova. So you see the ascension of different coaches along the ways. Is there an up-and-coming coach right now that you go to a shoot-around or you're at a practice doing your game prep for analyst work and you're like, man, this guy is on the verge of being the breakout coach?
Man, you put me on the spot there because I should be asking you that question because you do quite a bit of games too. And you know what's funny, Dan, before I answer that question, it's easy to tell, right? Like
Yeah.
when you see it. When you go to a guy's walkthrough, you'll be like, okay, this guy's different. For instance, when I went to Chris Beard's practice at Texas Tech, I'm like, oh, wow. When I went to Eric Musselman's practice when he was at Nevada, I'd be like, this guy's different. Okay. Whatever you think about him is whatever. That guy's different. There's no accident for success. Stan Johnson at LMU is one of those guys that I can see being very successful, right? And I remember Dusty May as an assistant coach, and he was at La Tech. I'm like, this guy's button up. You can tell when guys deliver the scouting reports. And that's what I always tell guys. One of my big things was I remember when I worked at New Mexico. And there was a gentleman, you know him from the West Coast, Craig Neal. He's at Nevada now.
Yeah. Noodles.
And yes, Noodles. And I would do I thought I was pretty good, and it wasn't me directed at me, but he was always say like, hey, never do a scouting report with your paper in your hands. I always tell coaches because the players don't get to put the paper in their hand. So if you're the coach, and if I don't care if it's 20 plays, they have to know 20 plays. They don't get the paper. So if you don't have command of it as a coach, then why should they respect you? And you know what he told me? You know who says like slap the paper out the assistant coach's hand? Charles Oakley. He said, when you were doing the scouting report, if you had paper in your hand or whatever, Charles Oakley would slap it out of your hand and you had to know. So that was something to me that the minute I went to a walkthrough, I'm like, who's that guy that has it in their head and knows how to direct people a certain way? Again, I know I'm not giving a bunch of names. I'm just saying what I look for. I'm going to tell you another thing I look for. And I've seen very experienced coaches guilty of this, Dan, and you may have seen this too. This is not football. There are 13 guys on a basketball court. Stop calling guys by their number. In football, I get it. There's 80 guys out there. They have 25, 32, 25. But in basketball, should we know their name, Dan? I mean, seriously.
Yeah. No, those are great points. And you mentioned a lot of coaches that I agree with. I do think Stan Johnson at LMU is a terrific coach. I've gotten to talk to him, off the court in regards to kind of how he structures some things, and I've been impressed. Eric Musselman, I'll give you a quick story about how he structures shoot-around. So people typically learn by reading, by watching, or by doing, right? And his shoot-arounds, they would go through a station of prep for their opponent, and guys would read on a board what the plays are and the actions that are. They would watch it on film, and then they would walk through it. So to me, I'd never seen that done before. It was ingenious. And I played for him in NBA Summer League before he was a head coach with the Warriors years ago. But I had never seen this approach to doing a shoot-around. And it made a ton of sense because if you cover those three ways that people can learn, players don't have an excuse. They should pick it up one of those three ways.
No, you make a great point. And again, there are a ton of coaches out there. Now you just asked me the guys I've gotten to see. So, in doing games and it's funny, Dan, a lot of coaches don't do shoot arounds like they used to. Like you
Yeah.
don't get to go to practices and they're afraid of the media, and you and I are both in the media. And I tell coaches all the time, like, why are you afraid of us seeing what you have going on? At the end of it, we're going to see it tomorrow night, And so my thing is, I just when I see coaches, here's the one thing I do. When I see coaches and I'll go to a practice and I see a young coach and I see him struggling to remember names, I see him struggling, and I said that comes down to one word: you're not prepared. It's different because we can say the same thing to us as announcers, like, how can you not pronounce that name? And there's some truth to us too. Like, hey man, the more prepared you are, you don't struggle with that. But when you're dealing with players and you're instructing them where to go, like for instance, something as simple as saying, you go over here, you go over there. No, you go to the wing, on the left side of the wing, you go to the left box. Like you can tell the guys that are really thoughtful and how to direct, are very directional when they're coaching. And that just comes down to who you've been tutored by. So I encourage guys, Dan, all the time. I say, what's funny? Coaches, especially assistant coaches, they have this thing about saying, well, if you want to shoot threes, get in the gym in the summertime. Where I challenge coaches, well, you go to clinics. Go learn from somebody how to speak and preach and teach, because you make a great point about Musselman, is that he's finding 3 different ways. He said people learn 3 different ways. If I only teach by video, then the guys that have to read it, right, and say, then they won't get it. If I only teach this way, then these guys won't get it. Now I'm gonna make sure somebody gets it, right? Because at the end of the day, the only thing that matters is what happens tomorrow night in the game. And I don't, the guy, and Dan, you've been around the league. Guys are embarrassed. People don't understand that. Like they can think what they want, but they're embarrassed to say they don't want to play. How many times does a point guard coach draws up a play? You're coming out of the huddle, and a guy says, "Hey Dan, where am I supposed to go?"
That was the most frustrating thing, is the lead guard coming out of a timeout.
Yes. And every time, like, okay, am I supposed to go over here? Like, dude, and you know what's funny? It'll be players that we revere, that we think are super really good players, and they just struggle with the mental aspect of the game. That's why I always say football players, to me, football players are a lot smarter than people think. Do you know how big those playbooks are? And especially quarterbacks. They have to see things and react. They have to know coverage. Like even running backs have to know pass protection, running. It is a very difficult game that you have to know. And the one thing I love about football players as opposed to basketball players, football players can draw on the board. Basketball players can't. They can't. I say, man, draw the play up. They can't draw a play. Football players, they can draw plays.
That's a very underrated skill by coaches. I know, because I initially thought my path was going to go into the coaching world. I spent a year with the Blazers, player development staff. I had a couple interviews for G League head coaching jobs. And in that first initial part of learning the coaching profession, running drills is easy. Substituting guys is easy. You grow the nuances of different parts of that. But you command a timeout, or you command a locker room by drawing a play, a set in a certain circumstance, is difficult. I was in an interview for a head coaching position, 12 people in a room grilling me with questions. Draw up a play with 4 seconds left, you're down 2. You either got to get a 3-point shot for your best shooter, or you got to get an easy 2-point look to force overtime for someone else. What do? You got to draw something up on the fly. Hopefully, if you're a good coach, you're prepared, so you got 2 or 3 thoughts going on through your mind to prepare for that. But then to draw it out in a way with dashes, with arrows, with perpendicular lines to call it a screen for players to understand and articulate it, that's difficult. And people don't understand that.
I'll tell you this, and people laugh, and I mean, it's again about being thoughtful. So when the teams practice, I always watch the way you made a good point about how people learn. You'll go to a practice. You'll laugh when I say this. The coach will draw up the play, and the players will be behind him. But when you draw up a play in the game, where do the players sit? In front of you. So think about it. Like, it sounds like a small thing. So they're drawing it up, seeing it a different way. So
Yeah.
it seems simple to you. Now let's add 15,000 people. He just screwed up. His girlfriend's watching. The AAU coach is mad. The this, the that, and now he's trying to think, and you're drawing up a play with 4 seconds on, and he's not getting the shot. But the cut that he's making is essential to you getting the shot to win the game. That's what people don't get. You know,
Yes.
it's coaching's very, very difficult because you're relying on them to get it. But you know what? Hey, man, as I tell guys all the time, habits, 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 habits. How do you teach? Is habits, because in pressure, if you've been a great player, when that pressure comes, it's like coaching is like free throw shooting. Free throw shooting, you do the same thing every single time, no matter if it's one person watching or 15,000, because it doesn't matter what they're doing because it's routine. Coaching has to be the same way. You know, I draw up a play. You got to get your players conditioned to practicing and being in environments where it's not even, it's like no one's there. This is what we do. This is what we do. Because the other thing is you don't have control over what kind of defense they're going to throw at you. That's why it's the getting smart players. You know, Bobby Knight had a statement that I believe. Like I used to be like, that doesn't make sense. Stupid gets you beat more than smart helps you win. I believe that more than anything.
I like that.
You know what I'm saying?
No, that is a great phrase, a great quote. I'm gonna have to remember that one. But we've talked a lot about coaching. Really quick, as we wrap up our conversation, and obviously the season's right upon us. We'll have you on again once we get into the season, and we have an idea of which of these teams that are really going to be Final Four contenders. But when you look at the lay of the land right now, I see a lot of really good teams. I don't see any standouts. Maybe Kansas, maybe Purdue because of Edey coming back.
Yeah.
Do you have an early Final Four grouping, or is it still too early for you based on not being at practices or seeing any game action?
Yeah, it's early, man. So many people lost a lot. Obviously, Kansas is a favorite. People pick. I think Duke has a chance because of so much talent. You mentioned Purdue brought everybody back in the form, but they had those freshman guards who are now sophomores this year. Yukon, I think they have a chance to be in the conversation. And I'm going to say Kentucky with these young guns. You know, I just think that they're so talented that at some point Calipari's he's got to break through. And you know, it's just, you know, last year you had teams in there like San Diego State and FAU. No one expected that. And I think, I wouldn't say unfortunately probably for the networks and probably for the basketball savants, that's going to be more of the norm. Mm-hmm. Because Dan, we're still in the last phase of COVID, right? COVID seniors. Yep. We're in the last phase of guys getting those waivers. Now they're going to eliminate those soon, but we're still in the last phase of guys playing 5 and 6 years. So those high major teams, which are really, really good, and we consider high major, more upsets are still brewing. I'm telling you right now, I call the Pac-12 the SWAC-12 because I believe them putting that tournament together with the SWAC ended the league because they lost 4 games to the SWAC because they have older guys. And people don't realize you've been a young player, talented. I've been a young player. But when I was 13, if I played against a guy that was 18, it doesn't matter how talented I am.
I agree.
These guys are playing against guys that are 25 years old. And now you put 3 or 4 of those guys out there. I don't care who you are. I don't care what you are ranked. That's what you're dealing with in college basketball right now. And you know what? This is more like what it's like when we played, Dan, where it was all seniors back then. Yeah. The teams that were senior laden won. That's what we're seeing.
Well, the coaches that have adjusted the quickest and adapted the best are the ones that are going to continue to have success year in and year out. You mentioned Kentucky. They're also on Gonzaga's schedule this year. That should be a heck of a game. So I'm going to hold you true to that the next time we talk, in that you think Kentucky may be the best team in the country. So, Chris, I appreciate the time. I know you're getting busy with all your prep for the season. Hopefully I'll see you at some point back in New York in the studio this year.
Absolutely, brother. And listen, man, we'll see what life without Drew Timme is like. I'm one sitting and waiting, right? See what life is like without my guy from Richardson, Texas.
There you have it. One of the best in the business from CBS Sports, Chris Walker, joining me on Gonzaga Nation.